So we've seen a market in which there are no barriers to entry at all. That's perfect competition. And we've also seen monopolistic competition is a kind of market in which there are also no barriers to entry. At the other extreme, we've seen a case of monopoly where there's only one firm in the market, and that's because there are very substantial barriers to entry for one reason or another that are preventing other firms from entering. But can we think of something in between? That is, where there are substantial barriers to entry, but more than one firm has been able to break into the market and grab some of the customers who are in that market. In this case, we'd be talking about what we call an oligopoly. Oligos means few and poly means many. So the kind of market we're talking about here is one in which there are only a few firms which dominate the market, but they sell to many consumers or many buyers. Now, in the case of Australia, there are actually very many oligopolistic markets. In fact, because Australia has a relatively small population, there are many industries which are, we could say, naturally oligopolistic. That is, there's insufficient demand to support more than a few firms in the market, who can then find ways of developing their own barriers to entry to prevent new firms from entering. So, for example, let's look at a few cases. Here we have some industries in Australia which are quite oligopolistic in nature. So if we look at the car manufacturing industry, the top 5 car manufacturers have over 50% of the market share to themselves. The top 4 banks have 80% of the market share for home loans. In the case of life insurance, the top 4 life insurers have 70% of the market share. In the case of instant coffee, the top 3 have almost 90% of the market to themselves. In the case of supermarkets, the top 5 have almost the entire grocery industry market demand to themselves. And for cola, the top two cola manufacturers have almost 100% market share. Obviously, we could think about who are the leaders in those markets. Well, in the case of cars, it's Toyota. The banks, it's the Commonwealth Bank. Life insurance, it's AMP. Instant coffee, it's Nescafe. In the case of supermarkets, Woolworths dominates. And in the case of cola, of course, it's Pepsi. Of course, I'm joking, it's Coca-Cola. No one would buy Pepsi in their right mind. Now, moving on to one of the central characteristics of an oligopolistic market is perhaps the most interesting characteristic is that because there are so few firms in the marketplace, each firm is highly interdependent on the others. What I mean by that is because there are so few firms in the market, any decision with respect to, for example, price or advertising or product development is likely to have a substantial impact on the demand for their rivals' products. So, for example, if you're one of a few firms in the marketplace and your rival, and you're producing something similar to your few rivals in the market, and one of your rivals decreases their price, it's likely that you would suffer an extremely large decrease in demand for your product. Or if one of your rivals establishes a new-fangled advertising campaign which is particularly successful, it could steal away a substantial number of consumers from you. And in that case, that would result in a significant fall in revenue for your company and therefore at least a fall in profits, if not losses. So in an oligopolistic market, because there are so few competitors in the market, when firms engage in different kinds of behavior or engage in different kinds of strategies, it can result in substantial effects on rivals. Now, because of that, each of the firms in an oligopolistic market will have to think carefully and strategically and in a rational way about what would the best strategy be given the likely behavior of rivals. Now, when we start thinking in this way, it's almost like a game of chess or checkers or something like that, where your moves depend in large part on what you think your rival's moves will be. So there's actually an area of economics called game theory, which focuses on this kind of thinking particularly, and it's especially relevant in the case of oligopolies. So let's look at an example of some game theory. And this is the game that we're going to look at. It's a very famous kind of game called the prisoner's dilemma, and it gives the flavour of the interdependence between players and the strategic thinking which has to occur. And it results in a very strange and interesting effect. So in the prisoner's dilemma, we're thinking of a situation in which you and your partner in crime have committed a robbery or something like that. And you've been caught and taken in by the police, and you've been put into separate rooms so you can't communicate with each other. This is a kind of a standard tactic that you find on the, say, TV show Law and Order. Okay, now, when you're in the room by yourself, you have to think strategically about what would be in your best interests. And in doing this, you need to think about what is the likely behavior of your partner in crime. On the one hand, your partner in crime might rat you out, dob you in. On the other hand, your partner in crime might stay silent. If your partner in crime does rat you out, then either if you rat them out too, you'll get 5 years jail. If, on the other hand, you stay silent while your partner rats you out, you might get 10 years and they get off on a light sentence. So in that case, the best option is to rat out your partner in crime as well. But what if they stay silent? In that case, you could rat them out and you'd only get 1 year and they would take most of the punishment. On the other hand, if you stay silent too, so you both stay silent, then you would get 2 years. So in that case, what's the best option? Well then, in that case, you should rat them out as well. As you can see here, what you should do is, it's rational for you to always rat out your partner in crime, to always cheat on your partner in crime, no matter what they do. This is called having a dominant strategy. Dominant strategy simply means you're going to behave in a certain way no matter what your rival might do. It's rational for you to behave in a certain way no matter what your partner does. Whether they rat you out or stay silent, it's always rational for you to rat them out. So here's the problem, so to speak, or the dilemma, so to speak. Or not the dilemma, but the interesting side effect. If your partner is also rational, they're thinking exactly the same thing. They're thinking similarly that it's rational that they rat you out as well. They have exactly the same mode of thought. But if that's true, then they will definitely rat you out, and so you will both you'll get 5 years, and presumably they'll get 5 years as well. But here's the interesting thing. If both of you had stayed silent, then you would have got 2 years. Do you see the interesting thing here? It's rational for you as an individual to rat out your partner in crime. You figured out that that's the rational thing to do. However, it turns out that if you had both cooperated with each other, which individually, you as an individual, is not rational. If you had both cooperated, you both would have got less time, 2 years. So let's apply this reasoning to some business examples. Let's say you're thinking about decreasing your price, trying to undercut your competitor. You think to yourself, what might my rivals do? They might lower their price, and if they lower their price, then you've got a choice. Do you lower your price as well, compete with them, match their low price, and make $2 million profit? Or, when they've lowered their price, do you maintain a high price and lose all your customers and make zero profit? Well, the rational thing to do in that case is clearly to match their low price, to make $2 million. It's better than zero. What if, on the other hand, they maintained a high price? In that case, you've got a choice between undercutting them and charging a low price and making $6 million, or charging the same high price as them, not competing with them on price, and making $4 million profit. Which is preferable? Clearly $6 million is better than 4, so you would charge the low price. Again, we can see you've got a dominant strategy. That is, no matter what your rival does, whether they charge a low price or a high price, you'll always charge a low price. It's rational for you as an individual to charge that low price. But what if your competitor is thinking in exactly the same way as you? If that's true, then we know they have a dominant strategy as well. Their dominant strategy is to also choose a low price. In which case, this will be the ultimate outcome. You'll both charge a low price, and thus both make, say, $2 million. But if you had both cooperated and charged a high price, you both could have made $4 million. What about advertising? Let's say we were comparing cornettos and drumsticks. These are similar products, but they're produced by different companies. The cornetto company might decide to advertise, to differentiate its product try to convince consumers to buy its product because it's better. If you're the drumstick CEO, you have to think to yourself, if Cornetto does advertise, what should we do? Should we counter-advertise to make sure we don't lose customers to them, in which case we'd continue to make our $4 million? Or, if they advertise and we don't, then we'd make only $1 million. They'd steal a whole heap of our customers. The rational thing to do, clearly, is to advertise. What if, on the other hand, Cornetto doesn't advertise? What should you do then? Again, you've got a choice. Should we advertise or not? If Drumstick advertises when Cornetto doesn't, Drumstick could steal customers from Cornetto and make $8 million profit. On the other hand, if they don't advertise when Cornetto doesn't advertise, neither of them advertise, then both of them might split the market between them, but with no advertising costs, and make $5 million profit. But clearly, advertising when your rival doesn't advertise, assuming the ad is successful, results in a better outcome. It's rational to advertise. And again, we can see, another dominant strategy. That is, Drumstick will always advertise no matter what Cornetto does. But again, what if the roles are reversed? What if Cornetto thinks in exactly the same way as Drumstick does? In which case, Cornetto will have a dominant strategy too. Their dominant strategy will also be to advertise. And so you end up with this choice being made by both. Both of them end up choosing to engage in advertising. Even though, if both of them hadn't, then they could have made more profit. This is again like the prisoner's dilemma. So we can see in these games something of a paradox. In our price war example, we saw that if everyone had agreed to charge the high price, then both of the parties would have made $4 million profit instead of competing, which is what they found rational to do, and made only $2 million. In the advertising war example, we saw that Cornetto and Drumstick, if they had agreed to not advertise, both of them would have made $5 million profit instead of what they did, which was both engage in advertising, what seemed to be rational, and made only $4 million profit. As we can see here, that if only they had found a way to cooperate with each other, to not compete, to not be rivals, but rather to be collaborators, then it would have been in their interests to do so. They would have been better off. And we can see how, if these kinds of games repeat themselves over and over again, perhaps there's an incentive on the part of these few players to not compete with each other. And that's something we'll look at in the next video.